Good morning, students. Welcome to our class, Assessment and Learning 2. And today, we have here our new lesson. It's about performance assessment. So in here, you will be learning more about how to administer different types of performance assessment. So I hope that you will listen and you will learn a lot of things from this video. At the end of this video lesson, you're expected to design appropriate performance assessment tools for intended student learning outcomes. Now let us define the term performance assessment. Performance assessment is an activity or set of activities that requires students to generate products or performances that provide direct or indirect evidence of their knowledge, skills, and abilities in academic content domain. So, this type of assessment provides teachers the information on how well the students understands and applies a particular skill. So with these products, these tangible products and these performances being demonstrated by the students, the teacher can somehow tell, the teacher can identify or can evaluate the students' learning, the students' outputs, the students' learning outcomes. So it's very important for teachers to administer performance assessment because it's more authentic compared to traditional assessment like the paper and pencil test. There are two major types of performance assessment. First, we have the product-based assessment, and the second is the performance-based assessment. So under product-based assessments, we have here the visual products. Examples of visual products are charts, illustrations, graphs, collages, murals, video presentations, art exhibits, and others. So for kinesthetic products, we have the diorama, puzzles, games, sculpture, exhibits, dance recital. For written products, we have journals, diaries, logs, reports, letters, and theses. For verbal products, we have audio tapes, debates, lectures, and voice recordings. So we go now to the second major type of performance assessment, that is performance-based assessment. So it has four categories. So we have first the oral presentations or demonstrations, examples, paper presentation, poster presentation, individual skills demonstrations such as baking, teaching, etc. Then dramatic or creative performance, examples, we have dance recital, dramatic enactment, role play, playing musical instruments, and poetry interpretation. Another, we have public speaking. Examples are debates, mock trial simulations, and interviews. Then, the last but not the least, athletic skills demonstration or competition. It's about playing basketball, baseball, soccer, and other sports. So here are the characteristics of a good performance assessment. First is that it is authentic. That is, it includes performance tasks that are meaningful and realistic. It is meaningful if the task or the assessment type you are administering with your students is relatable and it is of interest to them. So authentic, it will be considered authentic if it really measures the actual learning, the actual knowledge and skills acquired by the students during the teaching and learning process. So example, your topic is about cooking a particular recipe. So the teacher demonstrates first how to cook the recipe. So after the demonstration, in order for the teacher to assess the performance of the students, the teacher should let the students cook also. It's not enough for the teacher to just administer paper and pencil test after cooking demonstration. Why? Because the paper and pencil test cannot really measure the actual learning outcomes of the students. So cooking dapat pod kay cooking man ang topic. So dapat palutuon pod niya ang mga bata. Second, it provides opportunities for students to show both what they know and how well they can do what they know. So remember that the main goal of teaching is not just for students to acquire knowledge and skills. They've got to apply all these things into real life. They've got to put these things into action. So performance assessment, since it generates both products and performances, it is very sure, it is very certain that it really gives opportunities for students to showcase what they know and how well they can do a particular competency. So your performance assessment is good if it has this second characteristic. Third characteristic, it allows students to be involved in the process of evaluating their own and their peers' performance and output. So how can you allow your students to be involved in evaluating their own outputs and the outputs of their students? It could be through the use of rubrics. The rubrics would allow the students to assess their own learning, would allow the students to track their progress, and to identify their strengths and weaknesses, the points that need improvement. So the rubric will help the students to realize that. Another characteristic of a good performance assessment is that it assesses more complex skills. So unlike the traditional assessment methods wherein it only requires the remembering and the recalling of concepts, a good performance assessment requires or taps the higher order thinking skills of the students. Why? Because the students here are obliged or are required to do planning, are required to be creative, are required to more than just recall a particular concept or remember a particular concept. So example, sa college we have here kanang subject. It's called Teaching Social Studies in Elementary. So, for the instructor to have a good performance assessment among his or her students at the end of the semester, the final exam should not be, or ideally the final exam should never be the paper and pencil test. So instead of that, the instructor may require the students to demonstrate a particular lesson, a particular social studies lesson with elementary kids. In that manner, the instructor is not just measuring the amount of knowledge acquired by the students as to the principles and the concepts of teaching social studies, but then the instructor is also assessing how well the students can apply these concepts into real classroom setup or classroom setting. So if lesson demonstration is to be required by the students at the end of the semester, well, it creates or it allows them to tap their higher order thinking skills. Ano man, they would plan a lesson. They would they would communicate with their classmates. They can collaborate with their classmates. What else? They can identify appropriate strategies, appropriate approaches in teaching a particular competency, a particular topic in social studies. So in this manner, it's not only just about recalling or remembering the concepts of teaching social studies, but it's more on applying those concepts in the real classroom setup. Um, Another characteristic is that it explains the task, required elements, and scoring criteria to the students before the start of the activity and the assessment. So at the start of the class, it is important that the requirements of the subject are presented and explained to the students. These include the required tasks, activities or projects, the expected quality and level performance or output, the criteria to be included for assessment, and the rubric to be used. Ideally, students should be involved in the whole assessment process from the very onset by providing them assessment options, getting them involved in discussions and decision making on performance standards and criteria, allowing them opportunity to give feedback on teacher-made rubrics and to revise them, and training them on how to apply a rubric for self and peer assessment. Now, here are some questions which should be addressed in order for you to design your own performance assessment to be administered to your students. So first question, what are the outcomes to be assessed? So this question should be addressed by the teacher. Second, what are the capabilities or skills implicit or explicit in the expected outcome? Is it about problem solving, decision making, critical thinking, or communication skills? Another is, what are the appropriate performance assessment tasks or tools to measure the outcomes and skills? So this question also must be considered by the teacher in designing a performance assessment. Another question, are the specific performance tasks aligned with the outcomes and skills interesting, engaging, challenging, and measurable? So the key word here is alignment. Alignment between performance tasks and the outcomes, which is very important. Okay, your skills also to be developed among your students should be challenging. Challenging in the sense that it's not too easy for the fast learner and too difficult for the slow learners. Another question, are the performance tasks authentic and representative of real-world scenarios? Another, what criteria should be included to rate students' performance level? Last, what are specific performance indicators for each criterion? Now we have here a sample performance assessment. So as you can see, there's a table here, a table that has three columns. First column, we have intended learning outcome. So under this column is simply the target, the learning objective. Second column is the teaching learning activities. This represent all the activities to be done by both the teacher and the students in order to come up with the learning outcome, in order to achieve the learning outcome. The third column is the performance assessment tasks. These represent the type of assessment or the methods of assessment administered by the teacher towards his or her students in order for the teacher to assess or to evaluate whether the intended learning outcome is being achieved or not. Okay? So, example. Example of the learning outcome. Perform dance routines and creatively combine variations with rhythm, coordination, correct footwork technique, frame, facial, and body expression. So, teaching and learning activities um, which correspond to the learning outcome. Could be lecture, class discussion, movement exercises, dance demonstration, actual dancing with teacher and partners, and collaborative learning. So, performance assessment, culminating dance recitals, practical tests for each type of dance, reflection papers, peer evaluation rating. So these are examples of the performance assessment tasks that might be administered by the teacher in order to check whether the intended learning outcome has been achieved by the students or not. Another example of intended learning outcome is to participate in dance socials and other community fitness advocacy projects. So, its corresponding teaching learning activity is required attendance and participation in school and community dance performances. So, meaning to say, the teachers uh, planned activity is for the students to really attend or participate in a particular school or community dance performance. So how to assess this particular intended learning outcome? It's through actual dance performance in school or community programs, could be reflection or reaction papers. So these are sample performance assessment tasks to be used by the teacher in order to assess the students if they have achieved the intended learning outcome. So, gi-appeal po dire ang reaction o reflection papers because this type of task can measure the student's own learning and it will also help the students realize and track their progress. Now, in the previous slide, you have learned the different guidelines on how to make a good performance assessment. Now, at this slide, you're going to know how to conduct this performance assessment among your students. First is you have to define the purpose of performance or product-based assessment. This simply means that as a teacher, you have to be clear enough on the topics or the knowledge, skills, and concepts that you have to assess among your students. Second, choose the activity output that you will assess. So in here, the teacher should make sure that the output or the activity to be assessed should be feasible, meaning it's doable, considering the time constraint, considering the time frame allotted for a particular subject area. Another is the teacher also has to consider the availability of the materials or the resources to be used by the students in doing a particular performance or in generating a particular product. So these things should be considered by the teacher. Another, define the criteria. Well, criteria are found in the rubric, di ba? And then criteria has or have many types. First is the content criteria. This talks about how well students have mastered a particular concepts, mga facts, information. Process criteria have something to do with the proficiency of the students to demonstrate a particular skill, say cooking, dancing, etc., etc. Quality criteria have something to do with the outputs, how nice, how durable, how how beautiful the output of the students. Then impact criteria is the overall results of the performance and the product of the students. Number four, create the performance rubric. Well, the rubric would help the teacher to objectively rate the student's output or performance. This rubric contains criteria that are agreed upon between the teacher and the students. So it could be holistic rubric, analytic rubric, general rubric, and task specific rubric. Anyway, we will be discussing in the proceeding topics about this type of performance rubrics. What I'm just trying to let you know is that it's very important for the teacher to create performance rubric, and this rubric should be known by the students or to the students so that it would be fair to them. It would be clear to them as to how they will carry out a particular assessment task. Then the last is to assess students' performance and product. If there's one thing that I'd like to emphasize in this step is that teachers should always be objective and consistent, fair enough in giving grades. So class, that ends our discussion for today. And for your third activity, in a short size of bond paper, create an assessment plan for the subject of your choice. List down at least three intended learning outcomes and provide some appropriate teaching learning activities and performance tasks to assess students' achievement of the learning outcomes you listed. Here is the format. And do not forget also to put the subject area. The deadline is on February 19, 2021. So for the intended learning outcomes, you may refer to the curriculum guide of DepEd, and that is downloadable. So have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.